Good afternoon. Let me open up the Historical Preservation Board workshop. This is, we have a presentation, Tanya Petreka, the chair for the Historical Service Board. Put you in the spotlight, Tanya.
Yes. Well, thank you. So I'm going to be very true that this is my first workshop or special meeting I've attended. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Historic Preservation Board. And so I guess my question is to you, is I guess how, can I just talk to you guys or freely?
Yes.
Or we like
This is a back and forth.
back and forth?
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't make decisions in a workshop, we
All right.
have discussions.
We can't vote, yeah.
Okay, all right. So, well, the reason we are here is to kind of move forward on where we stand with the Historic Preservation Board. I've been the chair since July of '23. I started attending in '21, going to the meetings and being just a member, doing activities back and forth, different birthday events that we've had for the city, those kind of things. So that's a little history on myself. The board is to have 5 city resident members and 2 that can be non-resident. And unfortunately, we have never, ever had that, actually. We can go back to 2001, they did have 6 people, and they had them from 2001 to 2003. At that time, the Historic Preservation Board activity was to work on a video. And that video you guys have seen, that's the time video. And so what I'm proposing, or what I would like to see to move forward, is that we take a hiatus from the board for a 6-month to a year time, and that it gives the lawyer the time, you commissioners the time, and us citizens a time to come up with something that works for our citizens and for the city. And in that time, I want to be able to have a new plan, maybe the word society versus it being the Historic Preservation Board, a way to incorporate the museum as well. Because right now, how it is written and how it is, the Preservation Board is one thing and the museum is something different. And I think that causes a great divide. We already don't have the numbers. And I think that if we can find a way that works for our city, and why I keep saying our city is because the Chapter 20 that is in place right now and other things that we look at, we've adopted from other cities. And I think that this is a time for us to make something that is for us and what works for us here. And I think that's really, really important because also, and I think the lawyer can help me with this, by not being a city board and us working more with a society, like a Oak Hill Historical Society or volunteers, we can apply for grants more freely than if we are historic board run only by the city regulations. And we can do things in that way, and we can also bring in more money, more time, more volunteers. And so that's what I'm kind of hoping that we can move forward with that as well. And it's really important to me because our history, every day there's somebody that passes, or there's every day there's something that is missed, and I don't want that. And there's so many years that the museum has stayed closed, or we haven't moved forward here with our history and keeping it alive, and we don't want to do that. We just don't. And it's really important to me, and I think if you separate the two, the museum and the board, as we talked about in the last city meeting, it's a divide. It's a divide of people. And I think that that's an important thing for you guys to look at and remember, and to bring everybody together. And I genuinely really mean that, because the people's response from the museum opening and people that have reached out who have seen our video, even heard about our anthem, the Oak Hill anthem. I don't know if any of y'all pushed the button on the wall, but a lot of people didn't know about that. So they were like, here's this little piece. I know that there's legalities to making us a board and it making us society versus volunteers. And that's why I think if we went on a hiatus for 6 months, revisited this. Let us continue to work at the museum as volunteers, and let us show you what we can do. We have the numbers. We have a volunteer there today opening up. Me and Joanne are here, Dana, we're here, and we have somebody now, over there that's opening up. We have people that are wanting to participate, and I did not have that. We've had one person who's signed up, and since then has had any interest in coming upon the board. We've had one person in a year, and she's here today. And, she was asked to look at our other numbers. Hey, come aboard, come look for our numbers and see where, our boards are missing people. Come aboard that. So that's what I think is important, is that I think we can move forward and have more numbers and achieve something that is more city-driven and more historically way if we do it that way. So that's what I ask.
Well, Tanya, don't walk off. You got a lot of talking to do yet.
Okay.
So, all right, what you're recommending here is kind of combining the museum and the historic board together and not being a board per se, but being a service organization, volunteers for the city. Because I was reading in this thing, and there's a lot of power
Yeah, I read that.
in there, and I'm going.
Nothing has happened since
We
2001.
can regulate and
Yeah.
make decisions. I'm going, holy mackerel, I'm not crazy about that.
There is.
These are our
And-
current regulations too. What you're looking at here, these are our current regulations.
All right.
Yeah. Tanya reached out to me and through discussions how we kind of got from when I got involved to where we are today. In my conversations with her, it became apparent that the historic board was focusing mainly on the museum. That's our discussions, that seemed to be the main focus. They weren't doing the things here that are listed in here. They're focusing on the museum, and technically the museum's not actually listed here.
Right.
You could infer it maybe in something, but it's not specifically listed. But then the board were also volunteering to go down there to work at the museum. And so my concern was, if we have a city board, as you know, they're shackled, a harsh word, but they're restricted by the Sunshine Law.
Right.
So when you take the board that's governed by the Sunshine Law, who is focusing on the museum, and then they go together to volunteer together to work at the museum, at a minimum, you're creating a situation where there is a potential they could have a conversation about something that could come back before them as a board, and that's a sunshine issue. Minor issue, it's not a flagrant violation of the Sunshine Law, but technically it could be still a violation. And since the board really wasn't doing what the board needed, when I talked to her, I said, we talked about various options, and, we came down to the idea that, y'all could just volunteer and accomplish everything you're doing. And at the time, we did talk about the idea of crew. When we say society, I think what we're talking about is a not-for-profit tax-exempt entity that is not a city entity. They could go form it, create a tax-exempt not-for-profit, and then the city could contract with them to run our museum. We just don't want to do that right now because we have an ECHO grant. And under the ECHO grant, the city's the manager of we manage this. And if we are going to change management under the ECHO grant, we have to go to the county and get permission. And we kind of decided we don't really want county attention on us. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. I think we'll have 4 years, we think, is that
28.
2028, 4 years. Then the ECHO grant will expire, and we're not under the restrictions of the ECHO grant. And at that time, if we want to change who's managing the museum from technically other than the city, we can do that. If we do it during the ECHO grant, technically we need to have county council approval to go through that process. So if we're going to, so it may be more than a 6-month issue on that particular thing, because they can get up and start running if they want to create their own entity and have a not-for-profit tax-exempt entity. they can do that, and they can still volunteer, but it's still gonna be run by us. It's gonna be our museum, we control it, they're volunteering to help us. And then once we get out from under the county's regulations, or the Echo Grant regulation, then we have the flexibility to say, okay, do we want to, have a more formal management agreement with, if they create the entity? Or we can go back to saying it's a city board and amend what the city historic board, and we can call it a historic society, but it's still technically a city board. And we could focus more on what they actually do, their role, in terms of operating the museum and stuff like that. But you're gonna have that same issue where you have the people who are on the board can't be going down there volunteering. So you're gonna have if it's the city's gonna stay involved in the operation of it, there's gonna be a city board somehow overseeing it, then we're going to have to make sure that the people who are on that advisory board are also not the people who are down there implementing the policies that are set. So we've got then two groups of people we need. Whereas if we allow them, they don't need our permission to go and create their own historic society, not-for-profit, tax-exempt entity. And then once we're out from under the Echo Grant restrictions, we can then have a formal arrangement where they more take over a operational side of the museum, subject to what our contract is.
Is the agreement with the county Echo, is that with the city or with the historic board?
City.
City.
Okay. So if we don't have a historic board, or we're not violating, well, we've got to have somebody in the city.
We don't have to, there's terms and conditions of the Echo Grant. I don't think we're going to, by not having a historic board, that's going to violate those terms and conditions.
Okay.
It's really, how is that museum being operated? And we need to be the one managing it, because it's our grant, we're the manager of it, and we need to do the things that the Echo says we're going to do there. Historically, I would say, I'm not sure how many of those things we've done. So we don't want to draw the attention of the county's Echo by going up there doing an amendment to change management right now. Let's just we're doing better now, apparently, from what I gather, than historically, so we're getting better. There's no issues outstanding that I'm aware of, or we just don't want to draw attention to us.
Right.
So let's keep doing what we're doing for another 4 years till we've satisfied the Echo requirements, that term, and then we're out from under those restrictions, and we can go ahead and do however we want, or however this commission decides to do it.
So it would be okay to just leave the historical board hiatus in place for now and
That's
let
what
the
I was gonna ask.
museum group go do what they
And
can
keep doing
do?
what we're doing. They can, if they want to go form their own historic society, they can do that. They can form a not-for-profit, get a tax-exempt status, they can start raising money and make donations or whatever to the museum. And once we get out from under the restrictions of Echo, then we can more formalize that, a relationship. That's one option. And whether or not you want a historic board, I mean, just to kind of be direct about it, I wouldn't go appointing people to a historic board who aren't going to do anything. Well, there's no reason to put them on a board where we're not doing any of this stuff. So before you appoint anybody to a board, what you need to do is come up with a historic board with functions, powers, duties that you actually want them to do. And so, I mean, my understanding is the city doesn't want to get into historic regulations and historic designs. And so if you're not going to do that, what is it you want this board to do? So.
Well, and the level of responsibility and authority question, and I drew into here, I'm glad. One of the things that popped in my head was the Saints and Sinners Cemetery.
Yes.
That's a historic site. There's some cemetery grave sites back there that go back a lot of years, okay? Are we responsible for that, or the historic board, or?
It's, I've sent, I think I sent, when Con was here, a lot of information about these very, very old cemeteries. A lot of the cemeteries that have been old and abandoned are also black cemeteries, where and there was studies done within the last couple of years by the state on how to deal with that issue. I don't know what they ultimately came up with. And because you get into a question of who actually owns this.
Right.
You know, that's really the question, who owns this responsibility? Under the law, we do have the authority to go in to get involved with management of an abandoned cemetery, but we do not have the obligation to.
Well, they went through the process with the developers down there, and they've got they've got a group that's now has the responsibility for overseeing
Okay.
that.
And
All
they're
right, so,
Hi.
so, yeah.
May I speak to that?
Sure.
Awesome. I'm Drew Ann. I am actually one of the board members for the Oak Hill Saints and Sinners Cemetery LLC. Our LLC was formed by Joey Posey, who is it was very nice. The attorney for the developer helped us form the nonprofit. So we are officially a Florida nonprofit,
Okay.
privately owned. We own both cemeteries. And both cemeteries are also registered with the state of Florida. They were registered with the state of Florida's historic cemeteries in 1995.
Okay.
And that registration has been updated as of last year because I did that.
Okay.
And so we are managing it and we are working with it. And so we are an entity within the city and we are privately, it
So these
essentially
are
becomes
private
privately
These are
owned.
private cemeteries?
Yes.
Nothing to do with the city?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, but it is a private cemetery, like she was just talking about it in there, but what ran through my hand was reading all of this stuff in there, that the historic board could have some level of responsibility, authority, right? Because there's history right there.
They can make recommendations to this body, but
Okay.
when you start dealing with private property and you getting involved with how you're going to restrict or preserve private property, there's processes you have to go through. And, you know, you designate historic districts, you adopt regulations, and there's a lot to think about in doing those
Right.
types of things. But in terms of, you know, I know there was discussions about the Saints and Sinners Cemetery. I knew there were discussions about a cemetery, I should say,
Right.
during the town center development process. I didn't know how it ultimately got resolved.
Yeah.
But it's not the city's responsibility. Now, if the city wants to adopt regulations on historic structures and properties and you can probably get into restricting how those things are further developed in the future. There's a process to go through that. You know, designating things as historic structures and putting historic districts, and you set forth very detailed guidelines on if you're gonna renovate the house in a historic district, you gotta do it a certain way. Lake Helen has all those rules, they had that district set up. You obviously gotta think about, it's one thing for someone to voluntarily say, yes, I want my property in the historic district and to be restricted by those things. They're voluntarily being subject to that. Someone else who had already went and bought the house before you ever had these historic district restrictions, and then you go in and you tell them, well, these new rules are, you can't hardly do anything with your property other than keep it exactly the way it is. Maybe some issues there, so.
Yeah.
But it's much better.
This seemed to imply that the historic board could do that.
I don't think they could do it.
That scared me to death.
Yeah, I don't know that they could do it, but they could advise.
It doesn't even include, it talks about them going straight to the state historic preservation officer, not the city commission.
Oh, that area, yeah. I think they were talking about working with people.
That actually is from the county, part of that.
Uh-huh.
Chapter 20 is county, that is written for the
Yeah,
county.
I could tell
It
that
is
this
definitely
was
not
cut and paste from
relevant to
different
this
in there, but
city.
Reading that,
Yeah.
I was going, that bypasses the city
It does,
commission completely.
completely.
I don't
Yeah,
want-
really.
that's-
It really does. It does
I'm
not,
Buying that, yeah. So,
it's a very broad,
yes,
and it does not, it's not specific at all to what could entail or what would be. And again, he asked the same question that I think I've been asking kind of for a year. What would be the goal of that you wanted the Historic Preservation Board of Oak Hill to do? And I think those very things we can achieve, and we have started achieving as volunteers, because you have people that come in from all different aspects. And they want to help with putting on something in the park, or they want to help. But being tied down to the board in the sense of how it is written here does not work for us.
Right.
And it does. because I was told in May that I have sunshine law. Nope, no more conversation has taken place between me and Joanne has resigned from the board. So, and no conversations has taken place, and that has greatly, conversation-wise, affected us. Because, well, there was only 3 of us anyhow. So, but it did. It made a lot of conversations with poor Jerome. I called him 1,001 times. But, you know, that it does. It really restricts you. But you don't have a lot of involvement either. And when I was told I can move forward with volunteers, that's what I started doing, and whoa, that's changed.
Would
The
you
conversations
guys make
changed.
some draft recommendations into what the historic board should be and what the museum board should be, or, you know, society, or whatever you want to term it? Right?
How we could work together, or would
Right.
you want it separate? So that's kind of,
Well, I wouldn't mind it being together as long as there's no violations.
Violation of the sunshine law,
Sunshine
or that
law,
kind of
so
thing, and,
If
you
that
know,
would be
it-
just disbanding the
certainly-
historical board and going with the volunteer
Oh,
organization.
I don't have a problem with
Yeah,
that, but
stay with
it
the
certainly
volunteers.
can't have the authority that it seems to imply that this has, that bypasses the city commission.
right.
That,
Well, the first question really is, do you want to have a board appointed by the commission that is involved with historical issues at all?
I don't think.
Or would you rather have that handled by a private organization?
Well, the museum volunteers, I think, is doing what we want
What-
done.
what we
I can't
expect.
think like that,
Right.
the only other historic thing that, and then Dana probably got more on this, but the only, besides VIA Hall, right, it was the Saints and Sinners, and we've got some, you know, old cemeteries, graveyards out at Oak Hill Cemetery, but I can't think of another historic, I mean, Charlie Dean and the houses there, but they've been around so many times that, you know, those have passed hands from the Mosbys and all that, that coming in now and saying, oh, that's a historic site, I don't think that would fly.
Well, and those things we can do as museum volunteers. We can apply for having a designation, a land, like what we have saying with the AME Church. We've already said that. We will help with that process already. That's part of the museum, because we have the churches in there. We have the land, that we are part of that. That's part of what we would do. I mean, because, I mean, you can't just go and just stay at the museum every day, all day. It's part of that is the research and learning about it and bringing it in. Our displays are to be changing, and just like you said, us finding things here in the city that we want to, just simplified, by the way, is the correction of the birthday of the city. That was kind of comical a little bit to me, because I can't believe how many times we've celebrated it on different days and different months. And we just got that clarified all the way to the state. This is the exact day and this is the time, and those kind of things to be part of. We have 100 years coming up. And, you know, those are the things that I think would be greatly accomplished with more people, and I think that can be done with museum volunteers. And it's the history of the town.
You're working well with the volunteers now.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
doing more than they've ever been able
I'm
to
in
do.
great admiration of what you guys collectively have done over there, and how that looks and the history. And I can tell you, my family's in there, right, and we've been here a long time, and it is well displayed, and you know, it touched my heart walking around in there.
And
you
it's
know,
not just one person for sure,
no, it's
and
not.
that's
It's-
taking
there's
people
all-
coming
there's
in
a
and
number of
helping
families.
and seeing and hearing people. Like when
Yeah.
people come in and talk, they're like, oh, did you know this? And you're like, no, what about that? And then you
Right.
hear something else, and now we start looking into something else. That's, I mean, we have done that so many times over. So, and you know, I'll call Miss Dana or text her, hey, did you know this? Or, you know, those are the things that people feel very more
And
freely to
documenting
come in
that
and talk about.
information is important, because there will be a time, and some of it's already gone, right, that information and the source of that information
Sure.
is no longer here.
Yep.
So, yeah, we need to, I agree with that.
But we don't need a historical board to do it.
Well, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
But from what Scott was talking about, it seems like we need the historic board to be on our books until the the Echo
Right,
grant
as long as
period
the
is.
Echo grant is
And-
active.
That's up to y'all to keep it there, and there may be, things in the future you say, look, we can amend all these regulations and come up with, different commission in the future may have different ideas about historical preservation and things like this, and the historic board would play an active role in that. In Lake Helen, they have a historic preservation board which reviews all the plans for, if you build in the historic preservation area or you're gonna do any changes to a existing historic building, you gotta submit plans and go through the historic preservation board, who then makes a recommendation to the city commission. That's, very detailed level of how things, they do it.
Is it I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
Is it a requirement of the Echo grant that we have a historic board?
no.
No.
Can we activate and then deactivate?
Yeah,
Or,
the
as
historic board
needed?
is on the books, there's just nobody, you don't have a quorum, so you can't meet. So, and how long have you not had a quorum for technically?
Technically,
Yeah.
2003 is what you just said?
July was our last meeting of the Historic Preservation Board.
July of what?
This past July was the last meeting we had officially.
No, he's asking a quorum.
A quorum, you don't have a meeting if
We
you don't
have
have a quorum.
Three is a quorum.
No, it's
No.
not.
Actually, it doesn't meet the requirements.
No, it doesn't. That's what he said. It has to be 4 or more.
Can I help you out?
So,
According to, I'm just gonna help her out here, and sort of answer your question. I went back all the way, I went through newspaper articles all the way back to 2005, 2006, and then I came up here and sat, as Tasha knows, with very large books from 2006 until 2009, and then the minutes of the city commission from 2010 all the way through are available online, just so you have an idea of the research. There was a very active board at one point in time, and they did have a quorum in 2001, 2002, 2003. Not sure about 2004. They had a quorum, but it went in and out. 2 members resigned because they were afraid that they were friends and they were going out to eat, and the 2 women who resigned were afraid that they were going to be given sunshine law violations. So I find it amazing that here we are 20 years later talking.
Sunshine law's still around.
And they did. They resigned at that time, and at that time, Ms. Dana was put on the board. So 3 people went on, 2 people went off. It's hard to tell. When you go through historically, the minutes go out. There's nothing in the minutes about the historic board from 2006 to 2011. In 2012, in 2/7 of 2012, the city clerk stated that citizens are interested, and the commission said, when you have enough names to be brought for approval, when there's a full board, come back. There's not another mention of the historic board until 2019. So clearly there was never a
Not
quorum.
enough people.
In 2019, Commissioner Kathy Biddle inquired about the historical board, and the city administrator told her there are not enough members or volunteers as of now. In 2022, people were put on the board. We believe that a 3rd person was appointed in 2021. Oddly enough, in 6/27 of 2022, the city administrator came before the board here, and they removed all members of the historic board because they were basically inactive. It was passed unanimously. And then they made a motion to appoint Dana Graytrix, Nicole Payne, and Sarah Ireland Shoemaker to the board, which passes unanimously. For the record, it's supposed to be 5 members. They approved 3. That is still, when you're asking, that is not a legal, it doesn't meet the requirements of a 5-member board. Additionally,
Well,
Ms.
three
Shoemaker,
typically is a quorum for 5.
okay,
But ours get a little gray because we also go to 7.
right, and it does
So
say 5 local
Local
citizens,
plus 2 outside, so.
2 outside, and
It'd be
Sarah
7
Ireland
or
But it
Shoemaker
says
was,
can be.
can be. The
But
other
there's-
2 can be.
But does that mean it's a 7-member board or a 5-member board? It kind of, you
Right.
gotta have the seats to fill.
Right.
Right.
So it kind of creates.
So,
a very
and
situation.
Sarah Shoemaker doesn't live here in Oak Hills or
Okay.
in New Smyrna.
So
She
that's
lives,
6 at minimum.
so she lives
So you had
further
to have
out of
4.
town.
You had to appoint 4 then,
And they appointed 3.
so you didn't have a quorum.
So you didn't have a quorum
And
then.
it's not just appointment, you can have 7 members appointed, but if not a quorum shows up,
Right.
you don't have a legal meeting.
And so in 2023, Tanya and I were appointed to the board. And so it was Dana, Nikki, Tanya, me, and obviously Sarah, who was out of town, which made it a 5-member board. Of course, Sarah lives in Jacksonville, so where do you even count that? Right after we were appointed, or not long after that in 2023, Nicole Payne resigned. So now you're back down to 3 out of 5. Y'all following this?
Well, it's actually 6, because you still have someone appointed out of town. So you have to have 5 local, up to 2 outside. So if you have 1 outside, that means you have a 6-member board.
Okay,
Because
but we
5 have
only
to be
had
local.
3.
When you only have 3, that's not a quorum. You gotta have 4 to have a 6, you gotta have a majority,
Right.
so you.
So since that time in 2023, there's been 3 of us. I hope that clears up whether there's ever been a quorum.
Doesn't sound like it.
Good information, Drew, thank you. A lot of work went into
Yeah, I'd
that.
say.
Hi, Tammy Creek. So if you're going to take time, I have 9 pages of research and notes regarding the Historic Board. I'd like to pass it around with references. So my question is, does the Oak...
Please.
Oh,
Please state your name
oh,
and your address.
Tammy Creek, 124 North Gain Street. Okay. Is there any reference to a historic district in the comprehensive plan or the future land plan? And that's questions that I had for the commission to research. So if you guys decide to go on a hiatus for 6 months, we can research that. In the ordinance, when you said 5, I thought it said 527.
It says there's 5, I think it says there's 5
Consists of
residents,
5 residents of the city, and
And if
if
desired by the commission,
2 non-residents.
so that takes you up to, does that take you to a 7-member board?
Okay, that
So
was the
'cause you
confusion.
have- Yeah, it's worded a little weird
It's
in that
odd.
way. But so
Okay.
when we had one person appointed who was an out-of-town person who wasn't a resident here,
Right,
that tells me the commission created a 6-member board. Because you have 5 locals and up to 2 with commission approval out of town. They approved 1, so now we have 6. So
okay.
your quorum is always a majority, so that means you needed 4.
That's why I understand the math.
Yeah.
I was just trying to figure out the wording,
Yeah.
5 legally, what is that? So you just cleared that up. So I can email you this information if you're not going to make any decisions other than to put it on
Is
hiatus.
this the information you're talking about
Yeah.
emailing? Okay, so you can send it to Jerome, and you can
Everybody.
forward it to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'm a little confused. You said this, the city, the Echo Grant in the city. In my research, can you clarify the city and the ties just to the community trust for the nonprofit in the museum? I thought that's just the only partnership. I thought it was a partnership.
The ECHO grant lists basically 3 groups.
Okay,
It lists an architect who is going to help us. Then it lists the community trust who is going to provide programs there, but the city is the applicant. So the city applied for the grant, the community trust was going to provide programs there, and I don't know how many programs they provided historically. And then we had an architect who was going to donate services. So it's our grant with ECHO. And the important thing about the ECHO grant, it being our grant, is if the county ever decided that we didn't comply with ECHO, the
Right.
terms of it,
right,
it has to be paid back.
right.
And it's over a period of time, depending on when it was. At one time, it used to be had a 40-year restriction. And so if you violated the ECHO grant within the first 20 years, you had to pay the whole thing back. And I know this very well because I represent Lake Helen, and they just went through this, so they just had to work out paying back. And after you got past the last 20, it amortizes down how much you have to
Okay.
pay.
Okay.
So it's my understanding that Oak Hills ECHO grant is a 20-year grant. So we're in the process, so it's probably 10 years. If you violate the first 10 years, you got to pay the whole thing back. The last 10 years, it gets prorated down each year, it kind of depreciates each year. So we're to the point now where if we were in violation, we'd have to pay a small amount back of it, but it'd be nice not to pay any of it back.
We don't wanna do
So
that,
stay in
right.
compliance for the next 4 years.
When you say the community trust programs, is that operate? So when who's responsible for the operation?
City.
Oh,
City's responsible, because we're the ones ultimately that we have to make sure that we're complying with the ECHO grant. So if, like, the community trust said they were gonna put together, do programs, if they didn't do programs, that doesn't relieve the city of the obligation that they committed to have programs there. So the city would have to go to someone else to do those programs. Because it's our grant, it's ultimately our responsibility to pay it back. So we're responsible, we're the ones who are responsible for making sure that the hall, the museum, everything is operated pursuant to the ECHO grant.
So the volunteers that are operating the museum are actually providing the service that the
That's the
community
hope.
trusts.
Your own
That's the hope.
programs, yeah.
Yeah, either, because it says something in there like the community trust will provide the programs and services that are outlined in it, but it's the city's grant. So if we decided that we want, if the community trust isn't doing it, we still have the obligation to provide that. So in essence, we're now providing that or trying to fill that void with volunteers.
Okay, and the last thing, in that packet of information, to let the commission know that if you, especially it's great if you take time, because recently, the community trust, we're planning to increase participation by having a citywide picnic in March or April, weather dependent, at the community garden to, for people to get to know each other, to start participating more in the city with these boards and committees. And so I'm just working on gathering information for a new booklet that's separate from the city resident new packet, to disseminate information, how people can be involved and get to know each other. So if you give us the 6 months, that gives us time for people, to get more people involved. And, and in this process, this new handbook, informational handbook for the city, in the community trust, people who attend the meetings can review, edit, and have input in its creation. So then the board approves the completion once it's finished. And so this is an example of an inclusive community project. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had another question that when I was going through all of this. Dana, you may have the answer, but is Chung Park a part of that ECHO grant, or is that something separate?
It must be a part of it because we used the value of the land to be a match. And we used the donation of cash from Chung and from the $10,000 that Community Trust made as a match. And the remainder was the value of the building. We had the cash and the land and the building.
Okay, so,
And that made up what we could ask for.
right. All right, so, because one of the things that was running through my head as I was reading this was whether or not Chung Park was a part of that ECHO grant.
Yes.
And if it is, and we have to do some repair work to the pavilion, does that fall under this preservation? Got to have the board to research it and say yes or no and all that?
No.
The commission
I don't
is
think so, but-
responsible
No.
for the upkeep of the grounds. And with that, each year, Chung gave
Excuse me.
the.
Could you close the
playground-
microphone, please, so I can
Oh, sorry.
record?
I'd like to do that.
I don't think so from the standpoint of, we couldn't tear it down. We can repair it
Yeah.
Right,
or rebuild it, but it'd have to be rebuilt exactly the way it is.
the pavilion.
Yes.
Well, I don't know about rebuild it the same way. I know that the city's responsibility was to care for the building and grounds. And the reason the grounds and the park is so important is because ECHO, and the E is environment. So I did for many years science projects there. We had the kids at the garden from the school come and plant and pull weeds and care for that garden. So that's the E. The C is cultural, which is the requirement of the programs. The H was historical, which was a requirement of items and displays of the past. And the O was the organization of it, to provide for that organization.
Yeah, thanks. It was just reading
Thank you,
this
Dana.
and thinking about the Echo Grant and, you know, our responsibility, and I'm just going, okay, the focus in the history was the VIA hall and the contents, right? But did that include the pavilion, right? And here it does.
We actually just had our inspection the same day as our opening that afternoon. So me and Jerome stuck around. The Echo came and did an inspection, and they actually were very, very happy with the improvements. Since they've been there, we had added a couple of color, the black to the front and the
It looks
out
wonderful.
front, and they were really thrilled with the inside and our involvement with that. The other thing we found out is all the events that we're having in the park. I've kind of contacted everybody about keeping a head count because that adds to all of our numbers. So everything that has been happening with, you know, the Friends of the Library.
Well, yeah, when you partner with the library, you know,
Yeah.
for the winter concerts, you always take
Completely.
a part of that.
Those numbers throw us to a whole new level. And we had no idea at the time that those, bringing all that in also happens. And they both were there and they were telling us about that just exceeded what we had already done for this year. We've already exceeded.
Mandy
So-
always called and asked about when the last event was and when was the winter concert. And she reported all of that.
Yeah, and having the head counts, adding the numbers. We had the events in there, but we just weren't adding the numbers.
Right.
So we added those numbers and it really helped.
It made a
And, yeah,
difference.
And
Yeah.
that goes with the Christmas celebration in the park
That's
too.
huge,
That's another
yes.
one that's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, and we had pictures from this past year that I happened to share with them, and so those things
The
all are.
Easter egg
exceeding-
hunt?
No,
That's not there.
wasn't
It's
there.
been at the park. That's
That's
been
not at the-
Nancy
Nancy
Cummings.
Cummings.
Yeah,
I thought we did one for a while.
We
were
had
doing
to
something.
because it was wet.
Oh, yeah, when it was, yeah, that's right, okay,
We had floating Easter eggs.
yeah, okay.
May I add a comment to that?
Mhm.
I just wanted to explain that this Echo Grant started in 2008. So from 2008 till 2022 or 3, every year, we had people from the grant committee come and see what it looked like, what went on there. We had the many different sign-in books. But in the Echo Grant, I had to have a letter from the principal, which we still had the Volusia County School. And that principal said, each year, we will bring students based on the age to the hall for a historical presentation about the city. And so from 2007, even till last year, I've been doing that. And that's definitely one of those requirements that I had to fulfill. And every year, I turned into the city, since 2007, the numbers of people that were served in that hall. Okay, so we created the Light Up the Park with the city, with the school and the music that came for entertainment. And that's where that started. So I just want you to think, I haven't been ignoring numbers. We've been having numbers and people have been coming for years.
Thank you, David.
Who do we get to write or review? Tanya, do you, your group or the group of you guys submit your recommendations for what this ought to be? Let's gotta get
right,
this.
of that would be, I think we would have to go with a lawyer and figure out something that would be fitting to our city, and then he would meet with you guys on that. So I guess you would have to have another committee, like something that would be into writing that, if that's what you're wanting to do. Rewrite chapter 20 is what you're wanting to do?
And you can do that as citizens, you know, like, if we put together a committee, that brings the sunshine law back in. Anytime
Yeah.
we do anything, it's gonna bring the sunshine in. You can look at this and have your group, volunteers, sit down and say, you know, this is what other jurisdictions do, we like this language. You can submit that into Jerome, And then Jerome can disseminate it. And really, I'm the last one to get involved. Once they kind of say, yeah, we like this idea, then I write it.
Okay.
And so cut and paste things together to fit what y'all put in, what they approved, and then I'll put together an ordinance to redo it. So I'd actually be the last person to get involved, because I don't know a lot about historic, and it's really between y'all's recommendation and what this body wants to do, that's who makes the decision on what will the historic board do. Then I just need to say, okay, let's put it in writing to properly, outline what that role is consistent with what everybody wants to do.
I think that would also go with a recommendation of what the commission, with their own goals, would be for us to do as well. I think we would probably come up with something and then have that as well. If you're wanting to go back to the board status, having the historic board in that way.
I'm not sure that we really need to have a historic board. It
I
doesn't
really
seem
don't
like-
think we do either. I mean,
Sounds
it's
like
just
the
creating
volunteer
something that's not
organization, if they
necessary.
do the LLC like Scott had suggested,
Yeah, they've
then
got everything they need.
they've got everything they need and
Right.
they're fulfilling the requirements that we need to fulfill the
And
ECHO
there's no
grant.
sunshine law involved.
There's
Yeah.
no sunshine violations, so.
I don't have any disagreement with it, but then the city's gotta oversee, manage that. Is that Jerome?
Well, it's the same thing we're doing now, right?
Yeah, it's no
I mean, it's
different.
functioning pretty much on its own with a little bit of
I
guidance.
don't have a problem with that.
We-
It's
well,
just,
we don't
can-
give them
is
any
that okay?
advice.
Yeah,
I completely disagree. I think it's important that the city have a historic preservation board.
Why?
I think that because of what this says right here.
Because what this says?
Yeah, and everything that it's supposed to do is outlined right there, and if we don't like it, we can change it. The idea that that's somehow interfering with, well, I don't even know really what this whole meeting is. It's gone over my head.
What do you,
But I think it's very important that the city have.
why do you, and I'm not challenging you, I'm
Yes,
just
you are.
asking to, no, I'm
Always
not.
constantly yelling at me, Steve, for Christ's sakes.
I am not yelling.
All I did was give you my opinion.
Okay, and I'm asking you, why do you think there is a need to have a historic board?
Because we have historic areas of the city that may or may not have even been uncovered yet. The role of the board is clearly outlined in there, and if, like I said, if we don't agree with everything that's in there, we can change it and make it custom fit to our city.
But they're doing research anyway.
They can still do it. I mean,
Yeah,
that doesn't
right.
have anything to
The-
do with what I'm talking about right now. This is two separate issues right here. I think the city needs to have a historic preservation board.
I disagree.
There you go.
I think it's
That's fine.
necessary.
We're
And
all
we-
allowed to
we
do
can
that.
One of the things I read in this document, I'm trying to figure out what parts of this can you eliminate, because they really don't fit Oak Hill. One of the biggest issues that's always been is fulfilling these boards. I mean, you ask people to volunteer, they volunteer, then they drop off because they lose interest. I'm not saying to do away with this, but there's items in here that, to me, and just my opinion, do not fit Oak Hill.
Me too. I agree. One thing that I would say about the remark that you just made, though, was so if it's important for the city to try to populate these boards, and it's the commission's role really to do that. We're the only ones that can move or add a person to that. Why don't we have that on the website like we do for the PLDRC board? Why is it excluded? And why is any other board excluded if it's not populated right now? Why is that? I don't get it.
I'm not sure what you're talking about, and I'm not following you.
On the
What
city's
board?
website, there is a list
Right,
of people, they're saying, we need members for the PLDRC board. Well, there's nothing on there for the Historic Preservation Board, yet everybody's sitting here saying, we can't populate the board. Well, did anybody actually make an effort to do that? I mean, you don't see it on the city's behalf because it's not on the website. But it
Joe?
is for the PLDRC
Yeah,
board, which
Joe,
to me
before-
is different.
When letters would be sent out, or in the newsletters, when they were mailed out to everybody, it was always added that members were needed for X and Y, whatever board.
But not on our website, which I think is odd. I mean, if that's a basic starting point, is all I'm trying to say, and I don't actually recall you ever mentioning that in the newsletter for the city, but,
Well, not while you were on the board.
right, maybe for the last couple of years.
Yes.
Which is, I guess, where all this time frame that we're concerned about right now seems to be orientating from, but that's all I'm saying, is that it's not on there, and I'm asking why not? It seems like an obvious step for a city that needs members to participate in a board.
I think this would have sat in the closet for a long time had it not been for the city attorney saying, whoops, you can't have board members volunteering in the museum. So here we are.
And my question still stands.
That there's no advertisement?
Yes.
Well, I disagree with you, but
You can
that's,
just start up the city's website and look.
well, I don't
It's
have to do
right
that.
there. Dana wants to say something.
Yes, ma'am. Please come up front, Dana. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Getting all your steps in today.
No, I would just like for you to allow some time. I'm really kind of ashamed that I haven't taken more interest in drumming up business. We had Karen Merrick, we had Sarah, we had two couples that live on Maytown Road, and they've all come, you know, when we had the Historic Preservation Board recently. Not since you two have been here, but we have had people interested. But I think it's the lack of initiative on the part of me and other people that we didn't invite them to be part of a board. We didn't make it exciting. We didn't seek out people. Because lately I've just been reading what the purpose of the Historic Preservation Board is. And I talked with my friend at the museum who was the chairman of the Historic Preservation Board at the county. And what I understand from the several people that I've talked to is that a Historic Preservation Board can set the atmosphere of a city, the legend of the city, the purpose of the city by bringing what was and showcasing it from the past so that when people move here, there's something that's been ongoing. And I think if you just say today, we're just not going to do this because we don't have people to do it. I would like to have an opportunity to see that we do rewrite some things that are very specific, that we want to help set the identity of this community, and that we hold the past and the people that have made it, as well as, and somebody just told me just recently, there's a new archaeological site just south of Oak Hill that was a plantation. And this person is working in the dig of this. And I'm thinking, gosh, that's really exciting. If there was a plantation here and all these years it's been uncovered. So I think if you say no, we don't have it, that kind of shuts down tomorrow what could be in the future. I don't know if you know Andrew Wolf, but he lives right down the street from you, and he's really into archaeology, and he has asked me several times, when can I join this board, and how do I go about doing it? And I think there are other people out there, if we made it appealing, if we, promoted what it could be, not what it has been. Let's don't look back, because has been is a video of people who are now dead talking about, what Oak Hill was like, and that's important. But we can do better than that. We can do more than that. And so rather than today to just kind of say, I don't want it anymore, let's just give us 6 months, an opportunity to really see, because I haven't pushed people and gotten excited about it. I'm kind of just talking to the kids at school and telling our story. So I just want you to think about that possibility and what it could mean to the future.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, there's a possibility in the future of having a purpose for the historic board, but not under this guidelines.
Yeah, I think the
This
whole
needs a
thing needs to be
major
rewritten.
Right,
I think like what Tanya said, that it needs to be written so that it's written for the city, not,
right. Yeah, there's things in
Cut
here.
and pasted,
that,
it's-
you know,
yeah.
that the board, their historic board takes action and that they regulate and designate. That's the commission's job.
Yeah, and just maybe, just to go back a little bit on what Ms. Dana was saying, I agree about getting people live and getting people moving and doing that again. I have been beating the doors down with social media, which I do not like, but I am a photographer and my business is around that. So I have been seeking people out multiple times, and I know that a lot of you have seen my post, and I'm getting people, and that's how I'm meeting people to come in and do things. So we have been doing that. I think, again, that the changing of using volunteers versus a board has helped tremendously with that. And I really do. And I think Ms. Dana will agree. We have suddenly, Andrew Wolf actually is a member. He filled out his volunteer application with me.
Gave it to him.
Yes, so he is very much, so there are people that are wanting to do it. I think it just needs a new light and a new wording, and then, yes, revisit it with a different write-up maybe, or look at it, but I think let us show you what we can do as museum volunteers and see if that's what you want. And then we don't worry about the sunshine law, because I've become very quiet. We can't talk very much because of that. And so we need to be able to move forward with something more. And that's what I hope that's what we can do.
Thank you.
I'm not clear on that, why we can't talk, because we are not making policy, we are not voting on anything, we're talking about an object.
Because if you are both on a board appointed by the city, a city board, and you cannot discuss anything that could foreseeably come before you as a board member for a vote. So when I learned that this board, the historic board, was basically only dealing with the museum, and then that whole board goes down and volunteers and works together in the museum, and when they're on a board, when they meet, you have to have an advertised meeting, and you have to have minutes of that meeting. They weren't doing that. So that's the issue you run into. They can be much more effective. Things like this can honestly be run a lot better by volunteers and local organizations than the city creating a body to do it, because when the city creates the body, it comes with a whole lot of regulations and restrictions that we have to comply with. Now, I'm not saying get rid of the board, but don't combine, like with our PLDRC board, they give a recommendation. The board then doesn't go down as a collective group and supervise the construction. They don't do that. Once they make their recommendation, they're done. They have nothing to do with how that project goes from that point on. The same with the historic board. Once you make your recommendation, you're done. Then all of a sudden I'm finding out, well, that whole board goes down there and implements all this stuff they're talking about doing. That's when you start running afoul. So that's the issue. And that's why if you're not on a board, you can do all that. You're volunteers. You're not a public official or a public appointee. You're free to go and talk and do whatever you want. And you can talk about, go out to lunch, and you can talk about things that we could do at the museum. If you're on the board together and the museum is part of your responsibility, now it's hard to say, hey, why don't we talk about this at the next meeting? Boom, sunshine law. That's the issue.
And that's perhaps why Zach Zacharias, who was before our partner, Museum of Arts and Sciences, said the museum should not be part of the city, which is why when we got the donations from people, you said, we cannot take your money. And so the city could not take money as a city board that was donated to the museum.
And so that's.
No,
why
it could be donated to the city, it wouldn't go to the board.
No, it was to go to the museum.
It would have to be restricted for a particular purpose
Right.
from the city.
So that's at that point when the mayor had come up with this idea with the community trust, when we had the city, that they go under the community trust as a project, the community garden. So that.
Well, the money from Mr. Chung came to the city before we ever created the
I'm
community
talking about
trust.
That's not Tommy Gall.
Okay,
The community garden that the city has leased to
Oh,
a
okay.
group of individuals.
Mhm.
And so he came up with this idea which solved the issue of money. And so that was the initial, what was it, a compromise that was made between Tanya and our treasurer, that they become under our 501c3, the museum project. And that way, the money that's donated to the museum goes into the treasury of the community trust. And then when bills are needed to be paid, that they get it from the community trust. So Saturday, we had a nice donation made to the community trust. To the museum. So that money, I'm assuming, will be deposited in the community trust account. Is that correct?
I brought it here to Dr. Jerome.
Okay. So in the past, it has come to the trust, and that they have an account with us as a project of, museum is a project of the community trust. So what are you going to do with it? Where does that money go if it's not going into the museum account?
It can go, he just said, it can go as a different line item, correct?
it goes into restricted fund donations to the city. See, the reason we created the community trust, I wrote it, so I know. It was because a lot of cities want to help citizens. If you have an elderly person or a poor person who can't clean up their properties dilapidated, they need help. Technically, the law, the Constitution of Florida, says we cannot spend public funds for private benefit. So we can't go, even though there's all the good intention in the world, to take and say, all right, we're going to take city funds and we're going to go fix up someone's house, because that is spending public funds for private benefit. So you create this, so people want to start making donations for a particular purpose. It's never really clear, at least it used to not be, you could not get a charitable donation for giving money to a city. So the city that everybody kind of copied after was Port Orange. Port Orange has a community trust. They put on that whole event, they have it called Family Days or something like that. Yep, the community trust puts all that on. So the money that goes in there is not public funds. It's a private, not-for-profit, created by the city, but it's not public funds. So that creates the opportunity to do a lot of private projects and benefits to benefit the community, and it technically not qualify as public funds. So that's kind of the reason we did it here. And initially, in my recollection, I think Gary Biddle was the first chairman, I think, if I remember correctly. And I think didn't they kind of take care of our Christmas parade initially and some other things that they were kind of promoting and doing that stuff. And then they got into, when the school opportunity came, that seemed to be a big project they took on with the school, the charter school. But that's the idea of the community trust. And that the Oak Hills Community Trust is written very broadly. It's not tailored for any one particular type of charitable activity. It is written very broadly, so that the opportunities for the community trust to do a lot of things are built into its articles. It was called Articles of Organization, and its bylaws and stuff like that. And so that's kind of how it came about. It was a way to raise funds to be used for private benefit while still giving the public charitable donation.
So that's why the suggestion was made, until you get a 501c3, you can use this venue, this access. So the community trust voted to have the community garden as a project, and now we can use the 501c3 benefits for that project. they have a separate account.
And that's the one we recently did?
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we also did the same thing as a compromise when we were trying to separate the museum from the city board. So that still exists as far as I know.
Scott,
Hmm.
this document
Which document is that?
doesn't mention museum at all.
The chapter, our current historic order, yeah. You would have to infer that from their general description of their purpose.
So, the members of this board have nothing to do with the museum.
But they have, that's all they've been doing is.
So they need to stop.
They have.
There you go.
Yeah, that was the point.
Bingo.
To me, that's simple.
Yeah. They
That
stopped.
board has nothing to do with it. And it can be written in here that any member on that board cannot be a volunteer.
You can put criteria for membership.
Yes. That eliminates
Wouldn't that be an
everything.
easy way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, you could set the criteria. It would seem a little bit odd to me to have a historic preservation board that has nothing to do with your museum. They would seem like logically they would have something to do with it, but we would say,
No, wait a
you
minute.
can't just be a
This
volunteer.
document, because that's a historical building, has something to do with it.
Mhm.
They don't have anything to do with what's on the inside, which is the museum.
Mhm.
I'm trying to separate the two, make it
It's
simple.
broad, it's
Church
written
and
I
very
think
state.
you're doing it. I think you're doing a good job.
You know, I mean,
But if you do
I'm-
that, you separate the people again. Miss Dana, you understand what he's asking you to do. He's asking you to walk away from the museum if you stay on the board.
But at the same time, you just allowed somebody to be on the PLDRC who's also on the economic development. So how does that work?
that was cleared by the
Ethics
ethics
Commission.
board.
But why, if it's good for one, why is it not
Because
good for the other?
because he will have a problem if he, along with another board member, go and talk about a particular application that he is working on as the Economic Development Administrator that's going to come before the PLDRC for a variance, a special exception, or some type of approval. He
Yeah.
will have a serious issue at that point in time. You can't violate the sunshine law by yourself. That can't happen. You can talk to yourself all you want, it's not going to be a sunshine law violation. The problem is when you got two or more members of the same board outside of an advertised meeting talking about something that could foreseeably come before them. That's where you have an issue. So just because he is the Economic Development Director, which I had concerns with, and I suggested that he contact the Commission on Ethics to get cleared to do that. And they did, they cleared him. And because I had concerns of that potential conflict, not a sunshine violation, but there was a potential conflict potentially, or it could be viewed as a conflict. But that's why I suggested that he go and talk, ask the question to the Commission on Ethics, and they issued an opinion to him saying that it was okay, based on the facts.
Maybe we should do the same thing with the historical board and the volunteer organizations and see if their ethics commission would have a.
Well, but it's not, I don't know that it's an ethics issue, this is a sunshine issue is what I'm having a concern with.
Okay.
That's,
So that would be, you bring up a good point, because Commissioner Hyatt can't be on Community Trust because she's city commissioner, but we have Community Trust board member and historic board member, same person. So she's on both boards already.
Community Trust is not a city board.
Community trust.
So, but it would still be a conflict because we're a project of the Community Trust.
Well, there's two different things you gotta look at. One is the sunshine law, so that applies if you're on the same board, you can't talk, can't talk to each other outside the meeting. So that's the issue we talked about with the historic board going down and all the historic board members being volunteers.
Right.
And there's other ethical rules that public officials have to have. You cannot have a contractual relationship that creates a continuing or frequently reoccurring conflict of interest between your performance of your public duties and the performance of your private duties. Now, I don't know, the situation you're talking about is, would Dana being on the historic board and her relationship with the community trust.
She's board members on both.
I know, but would it create, it's not a problem being on more than one board. Problem is, would it create a continuing or frequently reoccurring conflict of interest between her carrying out her duties on the historic board and carrying out her duties on the community trust? If yes, then she can't serve in both. But I can't say that it would create that. I haven't heard of any conflicts, but
Okay.
that's a different issue compared to the sunshine.
Well, I was just trying to, when you were saying that it's kind of the same thing. But then again, we would go back to the division of people that want to be on the historic board, and that's the only thing I keep asking. Our thing is numbers. And I would hate for us to have this, but if that goes forward, we still don't have enough people to move forward with the historic board, even with adding Tammy. So, but.
I think the historic board rules need to be reviewed and revitalized, that has been discussed. The historic board can stay on the books. It doesn't have to be repealed so it doesn't exist. I mean, it stays on the books, and then the commission can adopt through consultation with, with the community on what they want the historic board to be. We adopt new rules, and at that point, then you would appoint new members to now start functioning the historic board based on the new rules.
So can I move forward as working with the museum volunteers if y'all choose to do nothing with the historic board today? Because since I'm the chair.
Yeah, I mean, as the historic, as a volunteer? Yeah. I mean, you don't have a quorum to do anything as the historic board.
And Dana can come and work and do things that's a squish until we have a quorum, or until y'all decide on something else?
Right, until we put together a quorum of board members that would meet. Right now, I would say the historic board is inactive.
Right.
So, I mean, if you want to make it easy, resign as from the historic board. You're not on it anymore. You can resign. You don't have any authority as a chairman of an active board.
Right.
You can't do anything.
Okay.
So the real role is as the volunteer. And so, and then that clears it all up. Once the commission reconstitutes the historic board, however they want to do, then you can reapply.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to see us, what we were originally talking about, 6-month hiatus on the historic board. Just shut it down for 6 months while we group in and determine what it should be assigned to do in its policies, right? And then we can come revisit what its purpose is.
Yeah,
and
I
then-
think that's consistent with what Dana and
Yeah,
everybody has
that's-
said.
that's what
You give
I
us 6
mean.
months to look at the rules, to kind of constitute and come up with recommendations.
But we
to
need
the body.
to get some people to help us come up with what this thing should be.
Well, I think the people that are involved
That
in
are
doing
here,
it should
right.
Well,
be
that's
the
what
ones
I
that
was
read
asking
to it.
earlier,
Right,
was
the-
for Tanya and Dana and
Regulations and
whomever to
requirements.
make some recommendations of
Yeah.
what it should be, in their opinion. And then we make the decision.
You ultimately adopt an ordinance amending this.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
I agree. Put it on hiatus.
I thought we did that a couple of meetings ago, didn't we?
I thought we did too.
Yeah,
We did.
Let's do it again.
make sure, right?
Well,
They
yeah.
can't do it, it
Well,
just
apparently.
Continue that, right, not,
Yeah.
so,
Can't do it at the workshop.
No?
right, we can't.
Is
We
there,
can't vote on
is
it.
there a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Can we have that?
Second.